Back in 2022, I put out a video ranking every chapter in the original Paper Mario. And with the remaster of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door coming to the Switch in a matter of days, I thought the time was right to do a follow-up to that original video and rank the chapters in TTYD from worst to best. Of course, these rankings are solely based on my opinions and experiences with the GameCube version of the game, as the Switch version hasn't been released yet as of this video. Oh, and of course, there will be spoilers in this video, so don't say you weren't warned. After you watch the video, let me know if you agree with my rankings, or how you would personally rank them in the comments below. Also, why don't you give this video a like and subscribe? It's totally free, and aren't all free things good? Anyways, without further ado, let's go! Starting off with the worst chapter in the game, we have Mario Shoots the Moon, the 7th chapter in the game. I like to think that this is a universally disliked chapter by many for a few reasons. For starters, the chapter doesn't exactly start off on the right foot. In order to use the cannon to shoot to the moon, Mario must first both get Gold Bob and General White's permissions. Locating Gold Bob is pretty easy, as Mario interacted with him numerous times in the previous chapter, and it's common knowledge that he resides in Poshley Heights. General White, on the other hand, he'll keep hopping locations, so you'll be forced to backtrack to every previous chapter except the 6th in order to locate him, only for him to end up back in Chapter 7. This backtracking is so unnecessary and drags out this portion of the game for no apparent reason. With the backtracking complete and Mario now on the moon, the rest of this chapter's problems arise. Due to the moon's low gravity, Mario moves at a snail's pace, almost like you have the slow-go badge equipped from the original Paper Mario. It is so painful to traverse the moon's craters, and you'll find yourself constantly getting first strike by enemies on the field. Once the X-Naut Fortress is located and Mario's inside, the chapter does pick up a little, but not much. I personally just find this area uninteresting both aesthetically and gameplay-wise. Sure, I guess it's cool to see where Peach has been held captive all this time, but for being one of the final dungeons of the game, this area isn't that large and it's rather easy to complete. The boss fight against Lord Crump's Magnus von Grapple 2.0 is pretty underwhelming, as it's just Chapter 2's boss with a bit more HP and attack power, and a few more moves. It's due to there being an overwhelming amount of cons over pros that Chapter 7 sits at the bottom of this list. The next chapter on our list is the Great Boggly Tree, otherwise known as Chapter 2. I want to start off by saying that I love the aesthetic and ambience of this chapter. The woods portion of this chapter has such calming music. I actually find myself listening to it when I need to unwind after a stressful day. But once you enter the Boggly Tree, that's when this chapter goes downhill for me. The tree's main inhabitants, the Punies, are what really bogged this chapter down for me. Get it? Bog it down for me? Anyways, the main mechanic of this chapter is that the Punies, accompany you throughout the tree as you fight off the invading X-Nauts and locate the Crystal Star. The problem here is that the Punies' mechanics are kinda jank, and it's not really fun having to maneuver them across obstacles like large gaps and narrow pathways, especially when the annoying Piter enemies drop down and scare them off the sides of the pathways. The boss fight of this chapter is the first encounter with Lord Crump's Magnus von Grapple, which I mentioned earlier is rehashed in Chapter 7's boss fight. I can understand why you fight Lord Crump in Chapter 7, as the chapter takes place at the X-Naut's main base, but I wish Chapter 2 would have had something more original and related to the chapter's theme, such as a Piter King or the Punies' rivals, the Jabbies. If this chapter would have taken place more inside the woods portion, I would have probably ranked this chapter higher. But as cool as the giant tree is, its mechanics just don't do it for me. Coming in at the number 6 spot of this list is Chapter 4, For Pigs the Bell Tolls. Like Chapter 2, I love the aesthetic here. It screams Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas. This chapter is pretty diverse within the TTYD fandom, as you either love it or you hate it. Honestly, I can see both sides with this argument, but since it's lower on my list, you can see I agree more with the dislike. A big reason for this is the extensive backtracking that this chapter requires, forcing you to go from Twilight Town to the creepy steeple, back to Twilight Town, back to the creepy steeple, back to Twilight Town again, and finally going back to the creepy steeple to face off the boss and finally end the chapter. Now, some people don't mind this backtracking, and more power to you. But for me, it's a little much, especially having to trek through the forest all those times with those annoying crazy daisies that can put you to sleep. I will say the story of this chapter is pretty solid, and the boss is quirky and likable. Plus, this is the chapter where Vivian joins your party. And can we all just agree that they're the best party member in the entire Paper Mario universe? Next on the list we have the starting chapter, Castle and Dragon, also known as Chapter 1. In my opinion, I think this is the best starting chapter in any Paper Mario game. I think one of the main reasons for this is because TTYD actually created backstories and lore for the party members, making us actually care about them. And one of those is Koops, a timid Koopa who wants to join Mario's quest to the dragon's castle in order to locate his father who went off to fight the dragon years ago and never returned. This chapter looks and feels similar to Chapter 1 from the first Paper Mario game, as they're both a grassland and castle, but this chapter expands on it a little more with the story in a more unique boss fight. Speaking of boss fights, the boss fight against Hooktail is one of the more memorable boss fights in the game. Not for its difficulty, but due to the fact that it's made 10 times easier by equipping a certain badge that's obtained in Hooktail's castle. Well, there's that reason, but also the very sus dialogue in the middle of the boss fight. Going from the first chapter to the last, the fourth best chapter on this list is Chapter 8, the 1,000-Year Door. For being the final chapter in the game, Chapter 8 really ups the difficulties with its enemies and puzzles. The entire game up to this point revolves around what lies behind the legendary 1,000-Year Door, so having an entire chapter exploring it is pretty awesome. It has the perfect mix of battles and puzzles, especially with the Riddle Tower, which is found roughly halfway through the chapter. I don't know about you, but I struggled with these puzzles as a kid. But that's probably due to the fact that I kinda ate dirt as a kid. The puzzles really make you think, so whoever said video games are bad for you can go sniff Hooktail's feet. The eerie atmosphere certainly sets the mood here, but admittedly it can be a bit repetitive near the end of the chapter. I will say the final boss fight of the game against the Shadow Queen is no joke, and it's one of the hardest boss fights in the entire Paper Mario series. I'm going to be real here for a minute, I actually never beat her as a child. I know, pretty embarrassing. That's why I'm looking forward to the Switch remake, so I can finally avenge my child self and send the Shadow Queen back to the depths of hell. Coming in at number 3, we have the stereotypical island chapter, the Key to Pirates, aka Chapter 5. I don't know if this chapter is generally loved within the TTYD fan base, but for some reason, I really enjoy it. Just like the first game, Chapter 5 takes place on a southern island. But instead of being inhabited by cute Yoshis, it's home to spooky ghosts. This chapter starts fairly interesting. Mario hitches a ride with an interesting crew, including Flavio, Admiral Bobbery, some Toads, Papatch, Four Eyes, who is obviously not Lord Crump in a pathetic disguise, I mean, come on! Mario's ship is eventually attacked by some Ember Ghosts, which ultimately shipwrecks them on Key Hall Key. Being shipwrecked actually means you are unable to leave the chapter until it's complete, the only chapter in this game to do that. The rest of the chapter sees Mario exploring the island with the help of Flavio and Bobbery, and exploring the Pirate's Grotto, where Mario goes face to face with the ghost of the Pirate King, Cortez. This is actually one of the easier boss fights in my opinion, especially if you use the Crystal Star power that you got in Chapter 4. It's after this boss fight where things get even spicier, as Four Eyes reveals himself to actually be Lord Crump in disguise. What? So with Cortez and his crew's help, Mario fights off Crump and his ex-Not-Narcs. Like Chapter 1, the characters really make this chapter a fun ride. And the Pirate's Grotto is just a cool area to me, and I always look forward to playing through it whenever I play this game. Coming in at the silver medal spot, we have not 1, not 2, but 3 days of excess. Chapter 6. Taking place on the XS Express, Chapter 6 transports you into the world of Scooby-Doo as you solve a handful of mysteries for these sus passengers. From theft of train property to threats of a sticky, yummy threat. The emphasis on puzzle solving makes this chapter a refreshing change of pace from the other chapters in the game. The only battles you'll encounter here are at the Riverside Station, and the eventual boss fight against the creepy Smorg monster, who's kidnapped all the other passengers and crew of the XS Express. I will say I'm quite surprised that they made this the 6th chapter, as the difficulty here seems more like a 4th or 5th chapter, but that detail won't derail my opinions of this chapter. It's a fun change of pace that every TTYD fan looks forward to, even if you already know the outcomes of the mysteries. And finally, at the number 1 spot, we have the best chapter in Paper Mario the 1,000-Year Door, Chapter 3 of Glitz and Glory. I know putting Chapter 3 at the number 1 spot is pretty basic, but come on, this whole chapter is just Mario meets WWE, and if you know anything about me, I am a big WWE fan. Polar opposite to Chapter 6, Chapter 3 focuses almost entirely on battles and minimal puzzles, as Mario works his way up the wrestling card to become the champion of the Glitz Pit, a title held by the Hulk Hogan ripoff Rock Hawk. As you battle your way to the top, Mario starts receiving cryptic emails by someone by the name of X. The emails lead Mario to discover that the star on the belt is a fake, and that the real crystal star is being used by Grubba, the promoter of the Glitz Pit, who has been using it to drain fighters of their energy to keep himself young and powerful. Once defeated, Jolene, Grubba's assistant, reveals herself as the mysterious X, and explains her story that she took on a job at the arena in order to find her brother Prince Mush, the first ever champion, and expose Grubba as the con that he truly was. It's a pretty cute and touching story. In terms of gameplay, the game tries to liven up the constant battles by creating objectives during the fights that you must complete in order to actually move up to the next one. It's a fun chapter with wrestling references galore, and that's why Chapter 3 is my favorite chapter in Paper Mario TTYD. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. I've been Bryse, and I will see you in the next one.